Hello and welcome to everybody who's here. I'm excited to be here today and, really to share some of the work that we've been doing in Central Florida with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to start by thanking Michael and Mandy. Lots of behind the scenes work goes on to make these events happen. And I also want to thank Nick Dutowski and the CS Mott Foundation for believing in the work that we're doing and investing in that. And my former colleague, Ali Moise, who has dreamed and schemed with me along the way. My colleagues, Alyssa and Neil, are joining us from Central Florida today to watch me present about Thrive. They get to hear a lot about it and work alongside me, and so I'm excited to have them. And I'm just thankful for everybody who's helped along the way and for all of you being here today and taking time out of your busy schedules to learn along with us. So we have a poll that Mandy will kindly put up for us, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how present are the SDGs in your community collaborations? Kind of helps us to gauge where you are in this process.
Okay, it looks like we have about 70% of folks participating. So I'll give it just another few seconds. Okay. Sharing the results here for you, Sandy. Looks to me like we have a number of folks who are at 5 or below, and then just a handful that are really digging in to the SDGs. So we have a lot to learn with you today.
Great. We can go over to the next slide. Great. So my hope today is that you'll gain ideas to engage key stakeholders in your community, learn about challenges in adapting and using the SDGs, and see how our approach has worked in Central Florida and the lessons we've learned that might help your community. So today we're going to discuss why the SDGs, where we started, the case for Thrive Central Florida, crosswalks and collaborations, and just my favorite piece, which is creating wins. So why the SDGs? Many, if not all of you, and I saw it, as Mandy mentioned, there were some 5s and below on our quiz. So many, if not all of you, are probably familiar at least with the SDGs, but I'd like to give an overview just in case this is new to you. So in September of 2015, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by world leaders at a historic UN summit. They officially came into force in January of 2016. Over the 15 years, countries are mobilizing efforts to end all forms of poverty, fight inequalities, tackle climate change, while ensuring that no one is left behind. And I half jokingly say that they're the 17 ways to solve world peace. I look at the goal itself as being the horizon, the big, hairy, audacious goal. And the targets are the goals that we want to get to. And the indicators let us know, are we actually going in the right direction? And while the goals have an international focus, there are ways to tailor them to use them locally. So where we started. So where we started, the entry points for our work really started with an internal approach. We started to look at what were we already doing. We started to map each of these areas to the appropriate SDG to chart where our grant dollars were going and trying to identify the impact on those particular areas. So annually, This year, we're skipping it. We're bringing it back next year. We have a table talk conversation, which is a community conversation. It's modeled after the Chicago Trust conversations. And we bring people together across the community to talk about our community. And then we gather data and match that data up with what we are seeing in the other data that's coming out of our community. Our 100 Women Strong is a strategic giving circle. Right now, they're working on women's empowerment. Rally is a social enterprise accelerator that falls under the purview of the foundation and was birthed out of our foundation as a giving circle that's turned into an accelerator. We have a couple of our previous funds, a homeless impact fund, which has helped chronically homeless people be put into housing and stay in housing, and our Better Together fund that was started after the Pulse tragedy really brought the community together around disaster, around LGBTQ issues, around Hispanic issues, and just really making sure that we as a community could work better together. Our education focus comes in a variety of different ways, mostly through our College Access Network partnership with the United Way and the Florida Philanthropic Network. We have scholarships available to students throughout our communities. And then we do a community impact and needs gap assessment that looks at where are we now and where do we need to be? And we focus our community investment grants and our Winter Park community grants on those. And then our grants from Signature Fund or from our donor advised fund holders. Next slide. So we mapped our grants first to the SDGs. Then we looked at where were we actually putting our dollars. And this is an overview of our grant making for the last year, mapped to our Thrive focus areas. And you'll hear me say the word mapping a lot. We do a lot of mapping, but each grant is coded to a primary SDG. And many of the grants will fall into more than one category, but we really want to focus on that first and primary SDGs. One of the surprises we had was that 42% of our grants fell into the livability category. We had this expectation that economic stability was going to be a little bit higher than it is. Next. So our horizon goal, and you've heard me mention horizon goal already, but that's really, where do we start? Where is it we're trying to get to? Was we wanted to create a healthy and thriving community. And we developed this roadmap to get there. And so what we started with was just setting the stage. We want to get everybody in the same sandbox. We have a bunch of people who are meeting to talk about similar things in different groups. And oftentimes they're not communicating with each other. We have areas of interest that cross over into other areas of interest where people are not necessarily cross-collaborating. And so we really wanted to set that stage and get everybody in the sandbox. We wanted to educate the stakeholders about what we were thinking and what we wanted to do, what we were trying to accomplish with the SDGs. We needed an inventory of the assets and dollars and social capital that we had in our community. We also wanted to take some time to understand the data. What was that actually telling us? Creating a common repository for data sharing was another step. We currently have a community library that sits in our OneDrive, but hopefully eventually we'll move over to a platform at UCF. And then agreeing on our best practices, creating or eliminating policies that either needed to be created or need to get out of the way, agreeing on our milestones, reporting on outcomes through a shared dashboard, and you'll see how we've developed those dashboards towards the end of my presentation. And then evaluating outcomes, which is really important. A lot of times we talk to nonprofits in our community about the difference between outcomes and outputs, and we think about overall impact, but we really want to not only look at the outcomes that we're achieving from the grants that we do and from the efforts that we put in the community, but make sure that we're recalibrating those as necessary. So this is the overall framework that we've created to put those steps into place. And this is the way that we measure our goals up against the SDGs and how we've brought this into the community. This is a framework that was created with input from experts all over the United States, Canada, and actually the world. And we've talked to people in academia, we've talked to governments, we've talked to other community foundations, and then just experts in the SDGs. The Brookings Institute has been instrumental in the work that we've done. We also established some Thrive indicators, and you'll see our website at the end of this presentation. Or maybe while Alyssa is on the other end of it, I don't know. Actually, they're watching in the conference room. I was going to say she could put it into the chat, but we'll go ahead and share that at the end of the presentation. You'll see our indicators. The other thing we needed to do was identify champions. And one of the things that I find is if you want to be successful in moving things across a community and getting things changed, you really have to have people other than you that are voices in the community. And it's great that the Community Foundation is a convener and that we have influence in the community. We're well respected, which is wonderful. We're behind the scenes on a lot of things that happen in the community, but it was really important to get that early buy-in so that we weren't dancing alone on this in the community. We held briefings as we started to formulate what Thrive looked like. We started to hold briefings and socialize the work. But the other thing we wanted to do was really listen and answer questions along the way. And I actually had one of the sustainability directors from Orange County tell me that their leadership didn't understand what we were doing and wanted to see action now. And if we didn't start to do some work right away, they were going to lose interest. And so we took that to heart, but at the same time, we knew that we really needed to lay down a solid foundation. So we started to move some of our community investment grants in the direction that we were going with Thrive before we actually got the impact funds up and running. The other thing was involving community stakeholders, and you'll see a slide later on the work groups that we've created. And so you'll see how some of those have come together, really looking at solutions. A lot of times we talk about problems, but what we really find is that we need to talk about what is the ideal state. When you think about a theory of change, you're looking at where do you want to go in the future? If we do X, we expect Y will happen, and hopefully the data will tell us that that's going in the right direction. But we really want to focus on those solutions rather than just perpetuating the same problems over and over again. We've used a format of collective leadership where there's leaders across the community who are doing work. It's not the foundation doing all of that work. We don't run programs. It's funny, oftentimes I go out into the community and I'm working with a group of people on something and they have a great idea. I can't tell you how many times people have presented me with the great idea that the foundation should lead this work. And I let them know that they're already doing a great job leading the work, and we will come alongside them and support them. But my team is two of us, me and Alyssa. We have a bigger team at the foundation, but we are the champions of our work in our community foundation. The other thing we needed to do was finalize the indicators. We needed to know how we would know we were going in the right direction. In town, I am referred to oftentimes as the list girl. We have created a top 50 list of where we stand on different issues. And unfortunately, many of those issues were in the wrong place. Like we have been traditionally #1 in running over pedestrians. Yay. No, not yet. We're also at the bottom of the scale when it comes to charitable giving, philanthropic giving, volunteerism. And so oftentimes our nonprofits wonder why they struggle to get dollars. It's probably because people are not giving in the way that we would like them to give. We're also on the bottom of the scale. We're #41 in access to healthcare, #49 in per capita spending on mental health care. And so we want to see those move and we want to see change happen. So agreeing on those community goals, outlining the strategies to get there. Another thing, this is just a Sandi tip, is I find oftentimes groups set goals, nonprofits set goals, but they don't create a strategy map to go behind it. And when I say that, it's really about how do you make sure that the work that you're trying to do gets done? And for me, it is about understanding what the goal is, understanding what the strategies are and the tactics we're going to use to get to that goal and who's going to be accountable. Obviously, measuring progress and refining and updating. Next slide. So what is Thrive? I've talked a little bit about the background on it, but Thrive is primarily a framework for grant making. But in a lot of ways, Thrive acts as a strategic plan for the greater Orlando community. And it really seeks to answer three questions. And that is, what does the data tell us? Is the community moving in the right direction? And who's accountable for the results? And these questions were developed when we looked at the existing data in our community. We looked at the gaps that existed in that data. And then we realized there's a lot of reports that are being done across our community that are published and there's no follow through. And so we know what the problems are. We just have to find the solutions and implement them to get there. And so, for example, I'm now part of the Community Health Improvement Plan. I'm leading access to healthcare along with a partner from Orlando Health. But every 3 years, our local healthcare providers have to participate in a community health needs assessment. And so in 2016, diabetes was identified as one of our top 3 issues. If you fast forward to 2019, diabetes, still a top 3 issue. And now it's actually worse. I haven't seen 2022 yet. It's supposed to come out next month. I'm really chomping at the bit waiting to see that information. But we asked ourselves, if this is a priority for our community, why did it get worse? And then with something like diabetes, who's responsible for implementing the priority? Is it me as a person who should be taking care of their own health? Is it my doctor? Is it the hospital? Is it the government that permits a Dunkin' Donuts at every corner? We didn't know. We still don't know for some cases, but we need to find out who's accountable for those results and are we setting the right goals as a community? Next slide. So how did we develop Thrive? We basically started by working backwards. And the way that we did that was to look at the indicators and identify those that we have the power to impact. There's many targets and indicators that are best addressed by government and legislation, so we kind of remove those from our scope for now. From there, it's easiest to think about this process kind of as a funnel, filtering from a large pool down to a narrow stream. With the indicators and targets identified across all 17 issue areas or SDGs, we realized that was still a lot. And so one of the things that we find is, people glaze over, their eyes get a little crazy, and it's overwhelming when you start talking about 17 different issues all at once and 17 different areas you're trying to solve. It's just too much. And so we funneled that down. We looked for a model that already existed, and we found that they aligned very well with the social determinants of health. And so we pulled together those 17 sustainable development goals and matched them up with the social determinants of health. And again, some of them cross over into more than one area, but what we did was take a primary approach to that. And then what we ended up doing was narrowing that down just a little bit more to taking food rather than being its own category. We put hunger into economic stability and nutrition into healthcare. Mandy, if you could tap on those 5 areas on the slides. So these are the 5 areas that we ended up with. We ended up with community and social connection, which is the people part of the community, and it includes social justice and civic engagement. Economic stability, which for us goes beyond jobs and increasing income. It also includes housing and transportation. I'll explain that in a moment. Education, healthcare, and then livability. And that's all the things that make a community a good place to live, like walkability, safety, arts and culture, and environment. You can go to the next slide. So once we identified our 5 impact areas, we took that and we mapped out sub areas. And I don't have the slide that shows how we did that. It's a really big mind map of stuff. And for a while, all of that was all over dry erase boards and my windows. If you ever come to my office, you'll see that I draw on everything that I can get my hands on. And you can't see behind me, but I have 4 dry erase boards in this room. But what we started to do was really look at, what are the issues that are affecting economic stability? And there's more than what you see on this list. But what we realized is in Central Florida, we do not have a good mass transportation system. And so you can only actually access 1% of the jobs if you don't have a car. And that's huge. Or take Uber or something like that, but that can get really expensive. And then the other problem that we saw is we're on the top of the list in unaffordable housing now. I remember 30-ish years ago when I moved to Orlando, we always said that we paid in sunshine. And now sunshine is not enough to get us adequate housing. And so we are in a situation where our housing is too expensive for our workforce. So we needed to have housing as part of economic stability rather than putting it in livability, which is neighborhood and physical environment. You can go to the next slide. The other thing, just as an FYI on this, is we've also tagged or starting to tag our fund holders to the SDGs as well, because we really want to identify the areas that they're interested in and how that matches up with the work we have. So this is a crosswalk that we did, and it was important to us as we developed our pillars to have community alignment. And we wanted to make sure we weren't creating a whole bunch of new areas of focus, but aligning with our mayors and other community leaders to help organizations create win-wins. And so if you look at this, you can see the 5 pillars. You can see the city of Orlando has a future-ready master plan. And within that, you can see the things that they're focused on. Mobility and connectivity or economic stability, energy and water probably live in livability, but we did want to make sure that we were trying to put them into at least one category. Orange County has a little bit different focus than our city does. The economic partnership, which is our economic development and our local chamber, had different focuses. Florida Chamber is also wanting to have a healthy Florida. And then looking at Enterprising Black Orlando and some of the other community leaders like AARP, who has a healthy communities. We wanted to look at all of those different things. And this is just one of many crosswalks that we've done. So again, I've talked about what Thrive is, but not how it actually works. And so the 3D process was first introduced to us by Collaboratory, which is formerly the Southwest Community Foundation, who've been amazing mentors and partners with us along the way. We actually just are getting ready to submit a poster for the ICSD that we've done with the Cleveland Foundation and the Collaboratory, focused on local coalitions and collaborations around the SDGs, which is kind of fun and interesting. So the 3Ds stand for data, dialogue, and decisions. And data is really identifying what was already measured and where the gaps are. We needed to set a baseline so we could actually measure progress later. As an example, and this actually happened the other day in our community health improvement plan conversation, we have food pantries all over our community. And one of the things that we look at is how much food is given away in our community. But if food pantry number 1 is measuring their food in pounds, and food pantry number 2 is measuring in bags, and food pantry 3 is also measuring in bags, but number 2 is using reusable bags, and number 3 is using plastic bags, we're not actually measuring the same thing when we talk about how much food was given out. And so one of the things that we're working on now is standardizing how we talk about what we're doing. And Second Harvest is leading that conversation, but I think it's probably from years of just talking about how things don't match up in some of the measurements that we do. And that's part of collective impact, is really shared measurements. The other thing and this is also where our scorecard comes into play. So as you go to the foundation's website and look at Thrive, you can see where the scorecard is so that we can look at how do we standardize the things that we're trending on and watching. So dialogue is the stage that we're in. We have been in for a little while. And these are conversations where they're leading to the decisions that we're making. We started by meeting with local influencers to develop champions, as I mentioned earlier. We're currently holding briefings with community decision makers, and we've done that for some time to get their buy-in, but there's always new leaders that are coming into the community. And so you have to make sure that you're keeping everybody informed and on the same page. In early 2021, we began hosting convenings for each of the Thrive impact areas, as well as cross-functional convenings. We recently just did a 17 rooms exercise, and I'll show you a little bit more about that at the end. And our thought process was really to get everybody to think more from a systems perspective. And we've got, like I mentioned before, a lot of times we think about things in just the meeting that we're in. So my colleague Allie always talked about it in name tags. I talked about it in hats, but nobody wears hats except for baseball caps and stuff like that these days. But a lot of times you have name tags, and I have one for the Community Foundation. I have one for the League of Women Voters. I have one for the Black Boardroom Leadership Institute Advisory. There's different name tags that you have depending on what group and what focus that you're looking at. And so what I encourage you to do is wear all of those name tags when you show up, not literally. You can if you want to. People will ask questions, might lead to interesting conversation. But don't take your hat off for one group when you go into another group. For example, we have people who serve on several boards throughout our community. And when they go to a meeting, they're just focused on that one thing for the nonprofit they're representing. But the other nonprofits that they also work with are doing similar work. And some of that needs to be cross-functional. It needs to be cross-pollinated. And we need to look at the efficiency of our resources and our time. And time is valuable. You can't get it back. So we're also involving our fund holders in these conversations and have already had some briefings and community conversations. The next part is the decisions, which is, and we'll talk about this slide in just a second, which is where we've had our working groups. And they've been developed for each of the Thrive areas. And they drill down into the difficult things that we need to talk about. We look at the data, we test the data with town halls, and we look at what are the things that we can influence now. And just as an example of this process from the social capital perspective, and this is not involving any money. I mentioned earlier that historically, Florida's been in the top 5 for pedestrian fatalities. There's an intersection by our Trader Joe's in Winter Park that has had a traditionally high rate of fatalities. And a woman was killed there by a truck. A friend of the foundation and also the League of Women Voters went to a city council person and said, what can we do about this? And what they determined that they could do was add a 7-second delay to that traffic light. That has reduced the incidence of traffic accidents at that particular intersection drastically. And so it's just taking an effort to do something about a problem that you see in your community and finding the right people. They didn't do a study. They didn't do a 20-year plan on traffic lights and pedestrians. They added 7 seconds, made a huge difference. So on to the scorecard. So scorecard's different from the dashboard, but the scorecard is part of our scorecard on the website. And this is the area where we're looking at relevant data to that already exists in our community to show if we're moving in the right direction in those 5 impact areas. And so our community is at 16.7% of the poverty line. We are ranked number 31 out of our 67 counties. We're actually trending in the wrong direction. This is some pre-COVID data, so it needs to be updated, but hopefully we're going a little bit more in the right direction. I'm not sure as of yet. But in this particular area, we have taken some liberty to proxy some different items that you won't see as SDG indicators. And one of them is 3rd grade reading. In Florida, and I'm sure across the country, we measure 3rd grade reading as an indicator of future success. That's not a global goal. One of the global goals is we measure girls in school. In America, we don't need to measure girls in school. We've got more girls than we have boys. We are successful in that particular goal. So what we've done is really localize this to just make sure we're going in the right direction in everything. And we've identified 25 different data points that we follow. One we actually had to get created, which was an arts data point, and we worked with SMU University to get that done. Go to the next one. So community collaborations, this is the fun stuff. And this is Mayor Dyer of the city of Orlando leading a discussion on partnering the goals with over 100 community leaders. And this was part of our 17 rooms exercise. Some of the projects we've either led or participated in are the voluntary local review from the city of Orlando. We worked side by side with Chris Castro and the team there. He recently just got a promotion from the city of Orlando to the White House, and we'll be working with the Department of Energy. So we're really excited for that. We've also worked on alignment with the county sustainability plan and the Vision 2050. So for those of you who may not be familiar, the Vision 2050 is really about land use, and it's about code. It's about how the county makes decisions around the way that land is used and the zoning codes and things like that. We had a separate sustainability plan, and those two did not necessarily agree with each other. We had an opportunity to participate with ICLEI in the Sustainable Cities Challenge. And I get it, Orange County is a county, not a city, but I was asked to serve on that team. And so we needed to come up with a project. And what we decided after a lot of different conversation was to marry those two documents to make sure that the sustainability plan and the 2050 plan matched each other, because without it, the sustainability plan was almost irrelevant. And so we wanted to increase that relevancy within the county. And so that's one of the things we've been involved with. The shared dashboard, we've worked with the East Regional Planning Council on a My Sidewalk dashboard. And then we've worked alongside UCF, the city of Orlando, the county and others, including the East Regional Planning Council, to create a shared SDG dashboard at the Global Economic and Environmental Opportunity Department of the University of Central Florida. We also created the community library, which, as I mentioned, right now sits in one of our OneDrives, but it's a way for us to collect reports, to collect abstracts, to collect articles that have been written about different things that are either identifying the problem or identifying some solutions to those problems and matching those up. We have 5 fellows that in the past, now we have 3 that have been working on literature review and going through that information with us. And then we held a partnership for the Goals Summit, which was the 17 Rooms with Brookings, where you're seeing a picture of that here. Next slide. And so here's just a sample of the dashboards, and the East Regional Planning Council dashboard delves a little bit deeper into graphs and data and looking at resilience within an 8-county area. And we partnered with them to be able to pull out data for each individual county for those 8 counties. And then for the SDG goals, we worked very closely with LA County, and they have an open source dashboard that they were able to use. And this now sits within the University of Central Florida dashboard. We are in the process of populating that with data. And when I say we, they, but they are in the process of doing this because we were part of a conversation that led to deciding where this needed to go. What I knew was part of my responsibility and part of our goals at the foundation were to create these dashboards, but I am not the most tech savvy person, and I am certainly not a graphic designer. And so I didn't want to be responsible for keeping these updated, but wanted to make sure they were. So for us, investing in these was more important than us holding the dashboards. So this probably hurts your eyes, but this is a Jamboard of the work groups that we did. And this is just one sample. And this one's from economic stability, I believe. And you can see a sample of my dry erase board down there. So that's kind of the way I think and get things out of my head. But what we did, and don't try to read all of this, it's actually in the report, some of it that we're sending out. If you actually want to see it, just email me and I'll send you some copies of it. But what we looked at is what were the things that we could influence for the short term, what were things that were going to take longer term, and what actually required policy change. And we worked with leaders across the community from different sectors. We had government leaders, we faith leaders, we had in our healthcare group, we have all of the 3 major hospitals, we have our healthcare planning councils, we have all of our nonprofit healthcare providers, our PCAN group, we have the health department, and then we have other stakeholders who are interested in this process. And so what we did was we went through these Post-it note exercises. We did it online because of COVID. We did have an in-person meeting for healthcare that was amazing. And we talked about what does it take to actually have a culture of health. We talked about racism in healthcare, and we talked about access to healthcare. And we're continuing down that journey. We've actually made our first grant for Thrive in Healthcare into a community health worker alliance to put health workers into neighborhoods so that we can increase that access to healthcare. Many times, either people aren't accessing healthcare when they need it. Their cultures may not believe in preventative healthcare, so diseases aren't identified until they're well on their way to being chronic, or they're confused by the healthcare system, overwhelmed by it, don't keep their appointments, they may not be able to afford medication. So having these community healthcare workers can help to navigate through that system. And then this is just the overview of 17 rooms and some of the partners that we had in this partnership for the goals. We held it as a 2-day summit, with the first day informing about great work that our nonprofits were doing and great research that's going on at the university. One of the things that we do want to do is highlight the good things. I have a friend at the Valencia Peace and Justice, one of our state colleges, Peace and Justice Institute, who always says, let's start with the good. We want to celebrate those milestones because working in this space can be difficult. You know, we as a society outsource our biggest problems to nonprofits. They're under-resourced to be able to handle them. And then we expect them to fill out 128-page applications, and then we pay them on reimbursement. Real story, that's happening right now in a community near me. Not us, we don't do that. But some of the government applications are insane. And so we've been working on how do we help them to streamline some of those processes. We've actually been consulting with the city of Orlando for the last 5 years on their grant process and work side by side with them. And I'm really proud of the work that they're doing and how they've streamlined their process and how they think about being innovative with those city dollars. So the first day we did this as exercise to get to know what's going on in the community. The second day we broke out into 17 rooms. We had over 150 leaders from around the community who went into different rooms and had conversations and came out with recommendations of things that we can do in the next 12 to 18 months. We're currently working on that report. We just recently had a debrief, and we're working on funneling down the things that we actually can work on and what the milestones are going to be and how we're going to track those and where dollars need to go. One example of something that came out of that is we're going to be doing a Fiscal Cliff Summit in September. We have done a grant to a local nonprofit called Poverty Solutions Group that is leading that, along with our Florida Chamber, our Career Source, our United Way, our Florida Prosperity Group, and a couple other nonprofits. And so the foundation is not producing this. We're just helping to invest in it and lift it up. And the objective of that Fiscal Cliff Summit is to help employers prepare for minimum wage hikes that may cause some of the people who are using government benefits to lose their benefits when they cross a certain threshold. We'll go to the next slide. This is the SDG learning community that Michael mentioned earlier on. This is open to all community foundations and guests of community foundations. So you're welcome to come and be with us as part of this conversation. It's a cohort of community foundations who are interested in SDG work. We come together each month to learn and to talk, but really the activities happen offline. And as I mentioned, we just did this abstract for ICSD, which is the International Council on Sustainable Development. And that was with the Cleveland Foundation and the Collaboratory Southwest Community Foundation down in South Florida. And these partnerships across the states don't happen by accident, they happen on purpose. And so we've taken a lot of our conversations offline and continued to work with each other to help to lift up the work that is happening in other communities. And it's really been very rewarding and an opportunity to learn from each other. I mean, I have learned more from the conversations I have with people across the states than I learn oftentimes in my own backyard, because we're just not there yet in some of the areas. And so those who are ahead of us can teach those of us who are behind. And then not the last piece, but one of the most important parts, everybody asked about, what about the grants? And so what we did was we came up with 5 different impact funds, and impact funds give us the ability to have more flexible funding. This has actually been raised from our community, from our fund holders. Disney has supported this economic impact fund, and Florida Blue and others have supported our healthcare impact fund. We've had a couple of matching donors that have given into these funds. Our objective is to do a couple of things. One is focus on pilots, accelerate work that's already going on, scale or fill gaps. So the community health worker program is a pilot. Florida Blue is also invested in that same organization, and the Winter Park Health Foundation is in the process of looking at working with them as well. They're also doing some work with our local hospitals. And so as we get the word out about the things that we're doing and we work on these projects together, it gives us an opportunity for more leverage. With economic stability, we're focusing particularly on income, access to housing, transportation, and nutritious food. We want to look at innovative approaches. We want to be disruptors. We want to poke the bear. We want to, make things better. But one of the important things for us is really prioritizing access to equity, including employment, housing, and transportation. We also want to be nimble enough that we can deal with short-term response and long-term critical needs. And so just to wrap up over the next 2 slides, the things that we're hoping to get out of the work that we've been doing and continue to do is really a move from individual and siloed approaches to more integration and cross-pollination when we're working on community-wide issues. I'm part of a group of over 400 community leaders right now that's working on creating a trauma-informed community. We've been working in a collective impact model with Peace and Justice Institute at the Valencia College being part of that. We've invested in that financially and been a sponsor, and we don't sponsor a lot of stuff, but we've been a sponsor for their conferences for the last 4 years since it started. But we've really worked side by side with them to develop deeper relationships and look at how our justice system and our public safety system and our child welfare system and our nonprofits and our faith community and our government and our businesses can all work together to ensure that we are trauma aware and trauma informed, and that we are doing no harm when we're helping people across the community. We've also taken an internal look at the staff for nonprofit organizations and the trauma that they experience sometimes dealing with other people's issues. The mainstreaming of our sustainable development goals is one of our goals. We want people to talk about the SDGs. We want to, create these universal dashboards. And so recently, as a result of our 17 rooms, we've asked nonprofits to start to identify the SDGs that they are working on. And we have a nonprofit search database where we list an SDG with each one of those nonprofit profiles. And then we want to see improvement. We don't want to just be meeting for the sake of meeting, as much as we love to talk to each other, network, and get together and have these great meetings and then have those parking lot conversations that you have after the meeting because nobody agreed with anything. We want to be bold and have those conversations in the room and really see those trends improve. And then we want involvement from all levels of leadership. We want the people who are experiencing the work to have a voice at the table. We want grassroots leaders, and sometimes working with advocates can be a little bit challenging. I have one that tests me to no end. She writes me some hate mail every once in a while, but I know where she's coming from and I embrace what she's trying to do. And so we talk. And then, community leadership changes. We have elections and we have executive directors that change roles and move and retire. And we want to make sure that this continues on even when community leadership changes. And then our next steps are really continued workshops, identifying opportunities for us to invest. We're in the process of aligning our community investment grants with our Thrive areas, developing those shared community goals and really putting them out there so that we know what we're working on together, and then measuring progress through those shared dashboards with the Regional Planning Council of UCF. And what's really neat is UCF has actually, through their nonprofit management institute, adopted Thrive as the areas that they're focused on as well. They've just added one, which is governance. And so they have the 5 areas plus one. They say it's 6, but we say it's 5 plus 1. So our theme is just loving our community. We are a champion for the nonprofits in our community. We want to see them grow and thrive. We want to see our community to be a great place to live, work, and play. And I will say, because we start with things that are wonderful, is I've lived in Orlando for a little over half my life. I grew up in South Florida, and it really is an amazing community with innovative people and great ideas, and it's a wonderful place to live, work, and play. But when you lift up the hood a little bit, we got some issues that we need to take care of. And so this is the way that we have been championing taking care of those issues. And I'm open to questions and open to emails after this. And we will be sending out the Guide to Thrive as soon as it makes it through all of the last communications, approvals, and design. Thank you very much.
Sandi, thanks so very much. Every time I hear you speak, I learn so much, and I'm left with so many questions. I will do my best to control myself and not just ask questions that come to me. I will share an observation, something I thought about as you move through your presentation, is it seems to me there's this really interesting movement between make it simple and then complicate it. That on the one hand, to have 3 basic questions. What do the data tell us? What directions is it moving in, and who's accountable? And what such an important question that we often fail to answer or to ask. And then in order to get at those 3 questions, it has to be complicated, and then you have to come back and simplify it again. So there's this really interesting movement that you go through, and the 3D process that you credit our friends at the Collaboratory of Southwest Florida with. From the Shameless Self-Promotion Department, I will put in the chat our issue, and once again I'll point back to this issue, the special issue of the Foundation review that we did, where Southwest Florida figures very largely into that.
And they didn't create it, they just shared it with us.
Yeah, and I'm having a heck of a time opening my chat. Oh, there we are. Oops. And so there's that element of trying to figure out how do you make things simpler, and then how do we need to complicate it to get at the adequate answer to it. And the other thing that struck me when you talked about the issue of girls in school, right? Not an issue. Girls are attending, in many cases, outperforming boys in school in the US versus many other countries that face a terrible problem with that issue. In our first webinar in Spanish, my dear friend Marta shared this phrase, si tiene sentido, si tiene sentido. It makes sense if it makes sense. you don't need to do gymnastics and fit yourself into the SDGs. You adapt them and use them via crosswalks and entry points. Your lead metaphor for the title of your talk. That's how it makes sense. And to get from hundreds of indicators to 17 goals to 5 areas, and that's more manageable as a concept. So I think there's a wealth here of insight. I know we're going to lose people at 1 o'clock because a lot of people have an hour to do such things. And I want to be very conscious if folks have questions, to get to those questions.
Yeah, so I see that there's one from Sally about acting as a community collaborative. It's complicated, I think. We act as a convener for many issues, but we don't host a collaborative. We host work groups. The work group people are part of collaboratives. We do the one that's run by the Peace and Justice Institute. I am a co-chair for the nonprofit leadership within that. And so what we say is that we sit at a lot of tables around the community and we host tables around the community. So we're not necessarily trying to do all of the work. We're actually helping others to promote their work. And one of the things with our healthcare work group is we've started to have some conversations about whether it makes sense to bring the community needs assessment and the community health improvement plan all under one roof. And if they want to take the work we're doing in the healthcare work group and integrate that, and if somebody else wants to lead it, I'm okay with that. I don't need to lead everything in the community. What I want to do is make sure that the work is going in the right direction. And so oftentimes, as I mentioned with the Peace and Justice Institute, what we'll do is work with them with strategy behind the scenes. So recently we had all of our co-leads get together at a design center that they have that I wish was my office because it's amazing. There's dry erase boards everywhere. It's like my mecca. But we sat around chairs with 6 dry erase boards going through basically their theory of change, looking at, what are we doing now? What's working in our community and other communities? What do we need to do more of? What are the barriers that we have or the gaps that we need to fill? And then how do we make sure that somebody's accountable for doing these projects? So some of the things we've looked at is there's a program called Handle with Care that focuses on children and safety and interactions with police and how that's handled. And so we put that as a priority area. Somebody's leading it. All of that stuff is happening. We're part of it. And we are working with partners and sometimes investing, but we're not leading it. So it doesn't have to be duplicated. You just have to get that collaborative to understand if you can. And a lot of it is talking with individuals separately to, again, kind of seed the playing field, get your champions ahead of time, but start looking at what if we did things differently if you're not getting the results you want. If it works, great. Just join and being part of the sandbox and the party. But if it's not working, that's where you have to say, okay, help me understand, why are we doing this way? And don't let it happen where everybody agrees on something and then you all go out to the parking lot and have conversation about why did we just decide to do this? It's dumb. And that happens all the time. At least it happened here. And so we want to make sure that those things get taken care of in the process of having conversations. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Sandi. And there's a great question about the dashboard, that it's open source. Can you talk about the people involved in that? One of your many innumerable. I was actually trying to count how many organizations and partners you mentioned, and I gave up.
Yeah. So we've embarked on lots of conversations. Lots of conversations. And, if you're thinking you can't do it, I'm a department of 2. So it's just me and it's Alyssa doing this type of work. We have, again, a wonderful foundation of amazing people and different departments that we work very closely with to get the work done. But to do the research and lead out on this, it's us and our fellows in the community. So we need to rely on community partners. We can't do it ourselves. And so we started to explore dashboards, and Chris Castro from the city introduced us to Aloha, Hawaii, and to LA County. And LA County has an open source dashboard and shared all of their code with UCF so that they could use that as the backbone of their dashboard. And so it's just been launched, and we just launched with Orlando, and so the county is like chomping at the bit going, we want the county now too. And so we're in the process of inputting the data into that, and then we'll do kind of a full-on marketing campaign with UCF around it and our other partners. For the dashboard with East Regional Planning Council, that's on the My Sidewalk platform, and they were already investing in it. We just invested to get more data and to partner with them. And then we have our marketing and communications people working on a plan to get that marketed out into the community through traditional media and also social media, and to stakeholders around the community who would benefit from using it.
And Andrew has a sort of definitional question. Do you consider yourself a backbone organization? That's a term that's often used for these kinds of collaborative, collective impact enterprises.
We don't. I think we're kind of the middle of the spokes of the wheel in some ways, but we're really not, we don't run as a separate entity just doing this work. I mean, we have a lot of things that are on our plate. And so we act more as a coordinator, I think, than as a backbone organization. We're all over the community. And so we know what's going on, and we stay in tune with everything that's going on. Within some of the Thrive areas, there are collective impact going on, like our local college access network is backboned by the United Way. The work with the trauma-informed community is backboned by Valencia College. And so what we do is just help those organizations. We're also the fiscal sponsor for Project Opioid, which is a collective impact effort around reducing opioid deaths. And so there's a lot that we're involved in that is conducted by backbone organizations. We just collaborate and bring those entities together. Like, I know everybody in town who's working in this. I've been around for a long time, and I, take the time to get to know people. I have, people always say you're so busy, but I don't feel like I'm any busier than anybody else in the community. We're all doing good work. And so it's really just taking the time to spend with people who are doing the work in your space and can help you to champion it and move it forward.
And that, I want to get back to that issue and highlight that as well. The on the table conversations that you have with people in the community. That was, again, a very powerful part of our first webinar in Spanish with our friends at Comunalia. And all three of these Mexican community foundations engaged in these intense conversations with their communities. And that value added of having that direct input and engagement, and then layered onto that, your connection with the nonprofits and the other sorts of organizations that serve those communities, and then with the governmental entities, that idea of being intersectoral and community driven, and using the SDGs as a shared language to start to talk about what are our problems, what matters most to us, and how do we make progress. And again, that issue of accountability, which I think is an important contribution and point of distinction with the work that you're doing there, really underline that. And while we wait,
Go ahead, sorry, finish.
While we wait for another question to pop in the chat box, no pressure, wonderful 38 or 40 people that are involved here. I'd love to see another question from one of you. I will point back, I popped in the chat two things: the link to our journal, where Southwest Florida Collaboratory figures prominently. There's two articles there from our friends at Southwest Florida. And another one inviting everybody to our next webinar on August 25th, which is going to be with Welcome America and the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. I want them to move west to be on our side of the state, I guess. And that'll be a great one to talk about welcoming immigrants and refugees into community. So I'm sorry, Sandi.
Oh, no, that's good. I was just going to say, we got invited to one of the mayor's summits, Mayor of Orlando, because we have a couple of mayors around here, but to actually host a table talk conversation. And so during their lunch break, we did a 45-minute table talk. So it was a brief version of it, but we were able to conduct a survey and then give the mayor the feedback from that survey. And so that was a really neat exercise. And I was at a table with people I had never met before that were very different from me. And it was really interesting to talk to them about different issues that were going on in our community. So that was kind of neat. And so those are things that we really, they take a lot of work, I will say that, and that was a whole team effort. Our marketing team, everybody was deeply involved in that process. But to be able to conduct those conversations, you know, we'd see people all over town that were like, oh, I was at a table talk. Oh yeah, table talk. And so people wait for it to come. We are not doing it this year because we're bringing together our steering committee in August to start evaluating what do we want to change up for next year, because we've kind of conducted it 3 years the same. And so we want to really look at what are the opportunities to change it up a little bit. But our steering committee is about 35 people from all different groups in the community. And what's interesting is when they first come to the table, they all think they kind of have the same beliefs. And then they find out that, you know, there's Democrats and Republicans and Christians and Muslims and, you know, people of all different ethnicities at this table. And it's really interesting to see how they bond and get to know each other. And that's one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, it's so energizing to do that, and an important reality check. And for our reality in the United States to bridge those gaps and to focus on a common shared good is such a wonderful value added to a community. One of the things that I'm always curious about in these conversations is how you help donors find their way to valuing the SDGs and helping them to align with a shared vision of how Central Florida can thrive, versus what is often a sort of individualistic, I'd like to help this particular organization, this particular issue. How do you bring donors together to arrive at a shared vision and to support the overarching goals of Central Florida?
We're still working on that. We actually even, you know, in marketing talk about how do we talk about Thrive to the general public. But what we've done is a series of community conversations during COVID. We really didn't have a way to go visit with a lot of our fund holders. And we oftentimes bring them together for focus groups and things like that, or we'll bring them together in a kind of collaborative space where we bring in a couple nonprofits or some innovative speakers, and they really like to be together to learn. And that's one of the values of being part of the foundation versus one of the national networks of DAF fund holder, you know, organizations, I think, is having us really embedded in the community. But we have also separate conversations with them as we meet with our fund holders on a one-on-one basis, talking to them from the perspective of Thrive. So really looking at it, it's, you know, we have these 5 pillars, and where do you find that you fit and want to be involved? And a lot of times, because we're a very strategic foundation, they want strategy. They want to really get involved with some of the nonprofits to understand problem solving, to look at the big picture. Mark, our CEO, oftentimes talks about the spectrum of being just a donor to really being a partnership for the, you know, partnership for the goals, and being a funder and being a grant maker. And, you know, we're not oftentimes able to just give unrestricted operating funds for multi-years, which there are some spokespeople out there saying we should do, but it's just not the way that our funds work. And so what we want to do is look at how can we have the biggest impact, and how can we also use our social capital with our fund holders to be able to talk about things from the community perspective. And, you know, we've become subject matter experts in a lot of things. I mean, I'm not a healthcare professional, but I know a lot about the healthcare system now that I've been immersed in it. So I can speak the language.
Right. Now, Mandy, I'm going to ask your indulgence because Michaela Young, I hope I'm saying that name right, asked a question about youth. And Mandy, I know youth is close to your heart. I'm in a nonprofit as a program coordinator. One of our programs, Philanthropy and Youth, and the theme is sustainability. What activity speakers come to mind that could motivate high school and college age students right at the initial stages of the Sandy? How can we help our friend Ms. Young?
So I would say, Michaela, if you email me offline, I'll introduce you to the UN Foundation. They have got some amazing young people who are doing work across the world and across the country, but also looking within your own backyard to see who's working in sustainability and other areas that are related to the SDGs in your colleges. Because oftentimes there's professors or students that are focused on that age group who can work within those spots and have those conversations. Nonprofit leaders who are working in that space are also oftentimes really good with youth. I speak every year for our Public Allies, which is a AmeriCorps program, and that's actually how I met Alyssa, and so glad I did. But I think that's an area that we want to grow as well. And I know now that Alyssa's in her role, she's a Gen Zer along with Neil on our team. And so they really want to engage the youth. But I commend you for putting together Philanthropy in Youth, and would love to hear more about what you're doing and how you're doing it, so we could maybe garner some ideas from you.
And I put a resource, one of our peers and a dear colleague here in Michigan is Betsy Peterson from Learning to Give, and they have a slew of online resources, K through 12, aimed at encouraging youth to be engaged in philanthropy. I can't speak specifically to the issue of sustainability per se, but I think you'll definitely find some useful resources there as well. And
which SDG do I think is most in reach? I would say zero hunger. Reduced inequalities is something that we're working really hard on as well, but I think we've got a ways to go in that particular area. We are a very diverse community, which I think is helpful. We just need to, increase our equity across the board. But our food systems have been working together for many years, and we have a combination of food pantries and grocery stores and urban farms. We're actually looking at some potential investment in an urban farm, and we've done that before. But there's enough food available. And so I think that we just need to continue thinking differently about food access and about nutrition. And I think that we have some great thought leaders in our community who are on the front lines of that. Our government is supportive of it. And so I think it's possible for us to create an environment where nobody has to go hungry. So that's the one that I think is most reachable.
And I mean, aside from the obvious, Sandy, that you would like a larger room with more walls so you can have more erasable whiteboards. And a supply of, I imagine, colored markers, right? Because if you're doing erasable whiteboards,
you
gotta have colored markers and Post-its to go with them. Aside from that, what do you think would be the one thing that would be a game changer for you if you could just do this one thing in Central Florida?
Honestly, it's pretty simple. I need more team. I need one more person. I need a me in the foundation so I can be out more. And that's something that I've thought about. It's not in the cards right now, but I spend a lot of time locally out in the community. Alyssa spends a lot of time locally out in the community. Neil and Nicole, who are our philanthropy team, are out in the community quite a bit, but there's only so much bandwidth that we have. And, I really enjoy this piece of the work, probably above and beyond anything else that I do at the foundation. And I work in some really cool spaces. I mean, we run a lot of different grants for other organizations, and we have been innovators in getting ideas off the ground. We just started this year the Black Boardroom Leadership Institute, which is focused on getting more Black leaders around our community at board tables, and then really creating a space where the nonprofits are open and accepting to those leaders. And that has just taken off really greatly. And it started with a Facebook conversation. But I'd like to be able to take up more of those things and to be able to delve down deeper into some of the issues and really work on how do we move some of the projects that we're working on forward and do it faster. You know, and I think that being an ambassador for the SDGs is probably, you know, the role that I would like to have, and I think that would move it forward better. But, you know, right now I'll continue doing what I'm doing, and I love every bit of it. So.
And you point to another issue that's come up in much of the conversations that we've had about being an ambassador for the SDGs and putting that in context in a nation where the SDGs are not very well known, where in some areas there's resistance or even hostility towards the UN and anything that seems globalist. And yet, I think you have articulated a process wherein it's really a bottom-up. I think that's part of the alchemy. But what are your thoughts on promoting the SDGs, being an ambassador for the SDGs in an environment that's not always very conducive or welcoming of that concept?
I think for the most part, when you speak to people individually, and you know, not in that groupthink method, you'll find that most people want to have a better place to live. They want good healthcare. They want good food. They want other people to be happy and healthy. And so it's really about promoting the outcomes, and the indicators tell us if we're going in the right direction. And I've been asked that because we're like a blue dot in the middle of a Red Sea. And we cover 7 counties, and the only bluish counties are Orange and some parts of Osceola, and Seminole wavers on purple a little bit, but many of the other counties that we cross over are very red. And so, you know, I kind of look at it as I do with the position I previously held with the League of Women Voters, where I had to be nonpartisan. It's like, we just need to get stuff done. And so in order to do that, we need to bring people along for the ride. And so I think, and I've had this argument out loud about, you know, whether we should promote it as the UN SDGs or whether or not, you know, doing something like Thrive or mapping to the SDoH is watering it down. But in the end, what we're all trying to do is get to the same outcomes. And if we're really trying to move the needle forward on those outcomes, it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is the results. And so, you know, and we can see those results because the trends will show us that we're going in the right direction. You know, I mean, I think we're number 31 in the world in our SDGs, and are not close to meeting any of them. I think Vermont is like number 1 in the States and being close to doing anything. And so, you know, if we as communities are spending our time and our resources doing all of this work, we have to see it come to some fruition. And what the SDG does for us is measure, have we met that fruition? You know, have we actually done what it is we're trying to do? And so that's what I love about the SDGs is they're very complex. If you look at them, I have a notebook. I mean, everything we went through SDG by SDG, indicator by indicator, and matched all of those up. And this has been a 4-year journey. It's not something that we did overnight. I think other people could probably do it a little bit faster because we've done some of that work and we've worked alongside others who have. But, you know, I think that it just comes down to the simple, do we want to live in a better place?
Well, with that powerful question lingering in the air, I think that's a lovely way to close. Do we want to live in a better place? And I don't think there's a single human being that would say no to that and to that invitation, and to take up the SDGs as an opportunity to measure how well you're moving towards being in a better place. So Sandi, my heartfelt thanks for all the work. You know, you've been here for 90 minutes with us, and I know we've probably spent double that getting ready and talking about what we're going to do and the slide preparation and everything else. So I'm eternally grateful to you. A big shout out to Mandy and our team at the Johnson Center that helps us do these events, and our dear friends at Comunalia for providing translation and being our partners in this series. So we'd love to see all you back at the end of August. There'll be a follow-up email. Mandy, do you want to add to that issue, the follow-up email? I can pass it to you.
Sure. Thank you all for joining and sticking with us. We will have a recording of this presentation along with the two that have come before this session if you want to take a peek at those. And then we hope to see you on August 25th as well for our final SDG series webinar. Sandi, any final thoughts from you?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's been a wonderful opportunity to share the work we've been doing and to, you know, give credit to a lot of people who have helped along the way. And, you know, I love talking about it. So really appreciate the opportunity. And
Sandi popped her email into the chat, so take advantage of that. She is great at answering email. I can attest to. I can attest to that. A great partner. All right. Well, thanks so much. I'll call this the conclusion of a wonderfully successful, engaging webinar. Sandi, it's a delight always to spend time with you, and I wish you all a lovely Thursday afternoon.
Thank you.